Good morning, guten Morgen, magandang umaga, konnichiwa, bonjour. So I was being kind of lazy this morning because I don't have to work until the second part of the day today. And I don't like to call it lazy because I'm probably one of the most productive people you'll ever know. But I also need to remind myself that I need to take some time to relax, to rest. And so that's what I did this morning. I was relaxing and resting, and I came across a video about someone with who was quadriplegic, who they were paralyzed from the chest down. And I don't believe in coincidences. This was a reminder to me. I had shared this testimony a while back, but I think it's really important to glorify the Lord and to share how real the spiritual warfare is. That people have no idea. Those who are not born again in Christ, those who do not know the truth, do not realize the severity of the warfare that people, the strong delusion is not knowing about the spiritual warfare and believing in the intrusive thoughts that pop into your crown. Satan's after your crown to steal your crown, your mind. This is what the spiritual warfare is. This is the battle. And the intrusive thoughts are from the enemy. And those thoughts can develop into feelings, and those feelings can develop into actions. So the battlefield is to control your mind. And when I was a child, I was between the ages of 10 and 12. I don't know exactly the time period, but it was between 10, 11, and 12. And I was sort of a latchkey kid. It's a term where my mom would tell me to go outside and play, and I had very little supervision at that time of my life. So I lived on a dead-end street, and there were other kids around my age who lived on the same street. So half the time we would get along and half the time we wouldn't. But I used to hang out with this boy named John who lived up the street. And I was a tomboy through and through. I always had worn out knees or holes in my pants, dirty, and I just was very boyish. So I used to like to climb trees. So one day in the fall, John and I were on a limb in a tree about 5 feet off the ground. And it was during the fall because there was a pile of leaves that I'm not sure if we raked it or if they were already existing there because we were in a neighbor's tree. And the reason why I'm sharing this testimony with you is when I was younger, I always had these impulsive thoughts and ideas. I didn't necessarily always follow through, but more often than not, I used to. So I'm not sure if John came up with this idea or if it was my own idea, but I was always trying to impress my peers. Like, it was important to me that they liked me, and I liked making people laugh and entertaining people on some level. Just being a kid. When you're that age, at 10, 11, and 12, it's important to you to be liked by your peers. So John and I were up in a tree, and one of us came up with the idea how awesome and cool it would be if we could do a somersault head first out of this tree up on this limb that we were about 5 feet off the ground, landing in this pile of leaves. Now it's fall, so it was pretty chilly out, I remember, and the ground was hard. It was rock hard. And John was more, even though he was a boy, he was much more, I would have to say, he was much more, what's the word am I looking for? Sorry, not a speaker. He was a talker about doing all these things, but he was much more cautious, and much more reserved in not being impulsive and doing things like, he was more careful than I was, for sure, about things, and not so impulsive and daring, and probably much smarter than I was at the time. So he was much more reserved and careful and cautious, is what I guess what I'm trying to say. So he dared me to do that somersault, and I was thinking in my head, no, I'm not gonna do it, you know. But then, because of the spiritual warfare, the urge to do it in my mind was pretty strong. Like, you should do it. You should totally do it. Because this is the spiritual warfare. Now, I didn't hear a literal voice to tell me to do it, but it was a thought that most people, even today, believe that it's their own thoughts that encourage them to do or not to do something, to be impulsive. Like, what's the big deal? You know, there's no harm in doing this. Everyone else is doing it. So these are thoughts that are not your own. This is a spiritual warfare, okay? That people don't realize because they don't have eyes to see, and they don't have knowledge of the truth to show them that, yes, this is very real. So as a child, I thought it was a good idea to fall out of a tree on purpose, with intention, head first into a pile of leaves that were on the ground, because I thought it would be cool if I could pull this trick off, and I'd be cool to my friend John, who lived up the street or whatever, that he'd want to hang out with me more, or whatever, that I'd have a friend. And so I followed through with those thoughts that told me that it was a good idea to do that, not knowing that it was the enemy that wanted for me to be harmed. So I did it. I fell out of the tree, but I didn't complete the somersault. I fell out. Now, I'm sorry that if this is so cringy to you, but I'm sharing this testimony because it's important. I fell out of this tree directly on the top of my head. The leaves have no padding whatsoever, so I fell directly to the hard frozen ground and cracked my head pretty hard, where I felt kind of like the wind was knocked out of me, basically. The expression of seeing stars, yeah, I kind of did see colorful, because I basically probably gave myself a small concussion, which that's dangerous too. So all glory to the Lord that I didn't have long-term effects of that either. But I'm sharing this testimony because I should have been paralyzed. 5 foot off the ground, falling out of a tree. Being 10, 11, 12 years old, I was probably about 70, 75 pounds of dead weight, falling out of a tree. I should have been paralyzed or even dead. But the Lord had other plans for me. That even though the enemy, Satan, was convincing me to do that, and I did it, the Lord stepped in and said, you know, I'm going to have her harm herself where it hurt, where I knew it was the stupidest thing I've ever done. One of the stupidest things. I've done many stupid things. I knew it was horrible that I just did this. And I learned my lesson, nearly knocking myself out when I hit the ground. My friend John not laughed because, I mean, we were a couple of dumb kids. He laughed and thought it was funny that I fell out of a tree, and I was like, oh, I'm rubbing my head, and I said it hurt. And he felt bad, but he thought it was funny as well, because seemingly nothing bad happened to me other than looking foolish that I fell out of a tree on top of my head. And so again, I'm sharing this testimony because all glory to the Lord, the Lord's mercy, that there should have been a worse outcome that happened on that day. That again, I'm a walking testimony. My testimony is very important to glorify the Lord. Moments like that, moments that the Lord brought back to my memory. I remember that moment. I forgot for however many years, 30 years. And when I became born again in Christ, that came to mind. And knowing the spiritual warfare and having knowledge about how real it is, and how knowing the enemy is trying to convince people to do things and to feel a certain way and to believe certain things. This is the battlefield that we're on. And I'm a walking testimony that this is very real, and that the Lord exists, and that the Lord is merciful and loving and is watching out for his children, even though you may think that he's not. I hope that my testimony edifies you, and maybe you look over your own testimony of the things where if you thought the Lord wasn't there in your life, I'm going to say that most likely you're wrong. That we make ignorant choices and bad decisions all the time that could come out so much worse than it does. But the Lord, being long-suffering and merciful, that he is there, and that he does love you, and that he's not far away. I love you. God bless.